Okay, so my name is James Morris. Today I'm presenting on pre-modern Christianity in Japan, the limitations and potentials of digital methods. This is basically an introduction to some problems and how my project, Kirishitanban in the Digital Age, goes about addressing some of these issues. Most of the things I'm talking about today can be found on the project website, which is kirishitanbank.com. With a few other things as well, such as a repository, and a bank of texts and some other things. The project aims to identify potential issues and limitations of applying digital tools and methods to texts related to Christianity from pre-modern Japan up to about the early Meiji period, 1873. So really, the first step is to talk about what sort of texts we have. So, my project and most other projects within the digital humanities are focused on Kirishitanban, which are texts produced by Jesuit missionaries in Japan between 1590 and 1614, maybe some printed abroad as well, but there's a little bit of a debate. Perhaps between 50 to 100 texts were published in total, but today there are only around 40 that exist, and they exist in about 70 copies across the world. This is excluding a couple of manuscript sources. In addition to this are other printed materials, so materials printed outside of Japan, mostly in China and Europe, and imported, and anti-Christian materials printed within Japan. Ebisawa Arimichi estimates that these three categories combined, Kirishitanban, imported texts, and anti-Christian literature, amounts to about 3,648 books. In addition to this, which I haven't included on the slide, are also Meiji period texts printed by the late Edo, early Meiji period texts printed by Catholic missionaries, and texts created by hidden Christian communities, which usually exist in manuscript form. Another sort of text is what I like to call Christian adjacent texts, but they're not really Christian at all. And these are, they could be anything really, but Japanese literature with themes related to Christianity. So I put one here, which is the Uozukushi Shushi Tegata no Koto by Jipensha Iku. And it's a comedic temple registration document. If you know anything about temple registration documents, they usually say, this person is not a Christian. If I find a Christian, I'm going to tell the authorities, don't worry. This is a comedy based around fish and that theme, right? So there's these sort of adjacent documents that no one's really studying. And then there are manuscript sources which mostly relate to the persecution of Christianity. Village records, like temple registration records. So scholars have tended to look at all of these in isolation, and there are some reasons to do so. If I get out my Komonjo camera and I take a photo of the manuscript, one of my manuscript sources, we're probably going to get some OCR result that I can work with. If I point it at a Portuguese language Kirishitanban, it's not going to give me anything, right? So there's perhaps some reason to use different methods for different texts, but I think this approach is also problematic because there are shared issues across all these different types of texts and possibly shared solutions. And I think now we're still at sort of a base level of making data, but once we have data ready, I think there might be great potential in sort of an approach which goes across these genres. So, one of the primary issues is the hybridity of the corpus. So there's Japanese language manuscript and printed sources written in an epistolary and vernacular style. There's Kanbun sources written produced in both China and Japan, and then there's European sources written in Latin script. And most of us in the digital humanities tend to get quite hung up on language and script, right? So we might like to think of these as Japanese texts, Chinese texts, and Latinate texts. But this approach doesn't really work when we're thinking about texts related to Christianity in Japan, because we have a great mixture of things going on. So if we just look at Kirishitanban as an example, in Kirishitanban we might have in various series of combination Japanese text, Latin text, Portuguese text, and Spanish text. There's a really simple example here. There's a Latin quote within this Japanese passage. No one, to my knowledge, please tell me if I'm wrong, Nakamura-sensei, is working on text written in two scripts and how we might have a method which deals with both of those. So at the moment, most people just say, okay, let's get rid of the Latin, let's ignore the Latin, which with this text, usually the Latin is translated, so it's maybe fine, but we're excluding stuff from our potential analysis, right? Then there's another issue, which is language and script in Kirishitanban have a sort of complicated relationship. So 50% of the Japanese language texts are actually written in Latin script. And no one's interested in working with Japanese written in Latin, right? Everyone wants OCR, which is going to deal with kanji and kana and so on. But perhaps this opens some new opportunities. We can perhaps learn from what's happening in Europe and apply some methods from there. But this is the basic problem with the sort of texts I'm working with. But I'm going to tell you now the issues sort of go to a much, much more basic level. So we don't really have data to work with. So this project is really concerned with trying to make simple, user-friendly solutions for sort of everyone to use. Whether we're doing that or not, I don't really know. But I'm going to look at three sort of issues and solutions that we have. So we don't have any digitized transcriptions. Maybe we have some now through, I don't know, maybe there's some Kirishitanban held at in the Historiographical Institute. But at the start of the project, there weren't any digitized versions of Kirishitanban texts, so we decided to start a transcription project with Minade Honkoku. And yesterday when I checked, of 31 texts that we originally uploaded, so these are being collaboratively transcribed, 10 have been completed, 9 are over 90% completion, and the others are sort of in a year and a half. So all that data is now downloadable, and people can do what they want with it, analyze it in whatever way they like, but I don't think this is probably not of great interest to most people here. The important point is we're still in stage 1 of data creation. But the issues extend even further than that. We have a problem of even inputting these texts onto a computer. So Kirishitanban texts contain special characters, ligatures, and these were then carried over into Japanese literature as kanji, and also into manuscript texts as handwritten little characters, right? Which, until last year, we have not been able to type onto a computer. So we have an example up here. This is a character, you can see it's made up of a D, a Latin D, a long S, and a tilde, and so it's made up of these Latin graphemes, right? But it's not read like an English word where we might sound it out. We're not going de tilde, right? It's read as a kanji, so this is Deus, meaning God. And up until, well, probably still now, there's been 4 methods to render this character. So you might type in DS, which is great. We keep the shape, right, if we type in DS. But we have a problem of there's actually 6 different varieties of DS, of Deus. And if we type a DS, we can't really distinguish between any of them. But we have the option of keeping shape. Then we have the option of keeping sound, where we just put kana in there. But obviously, if we're doing a digital analysis and we want to count number of words, for example, or number of characters, all of this is screwing things up, right? We have one character, but it's either going to become 2 in Latin or 3 in Japanese. Then some people have offered a system of alternative symbols, such as triangles or stars. This was mainly in the early 90s. And then the other option is to screenshot. So what we did was design a font which allows all this to be typed. I mean, this is just a sample. I think there's about 40 characters. And this allows the ligatures to be typed, which maybe you want it. And this increases accuracy in 2 ways, if you want accuracy. By keeping the appearance of the original text and by retaining the reading method. So people, we're not coming across a DS, and probably when we see a DS, we want to say, like I'm saying now, that's DS, right? We don't want to read Davis. People are reading this as a kanji, right? So we retain that historical reading method as well. And all these special characters are input by little short codes, which start with a backslash. And what this means is we can now search for them, count them, look at the different ones being used, because we have 6 different DSs in the system, so we can now count this DS appears this many times, and this one appears this many times, and so on. So it's maybe an over-engineered solution to quite a problem which only maybe 10 people globally have, but I mean, they gave me money to do it, so might as well. The more major problem is there's a huge lack of dictionary resources. And this is sort of the last thing I'll talk about for a couple of minutes. And this is, I say, lack of dictionary resources in 2 senses. There's a lack of searchable dictionaries online. So if you're a student, a PhD student, for example, wanting to read Kirishitanban, you can't search for the terms. So this is just an example. 16 characters beginning with A. Japan Knowledge has 5 of them. Other popular dictionaries have less. Some of them, such as Anjo, does appear in Japan Knowledge if you change the spelling to Gendai, Kanazukai. It's a modern rendering of the kana, but that's not how it appears in the text. So is a student going to think, I need to change the characters here? But basically, they don't exist in most searchable dictionaries. And then this produces a problem with text segmentation, right? So as most of you know, in Japanese, when we want to segment a Japanese text, we usually use a word bank or a dictionary, which is telling our computer, right, this is where we're finishing our word, right? This is where the next word begins, because we don't have things like white space between the words where the computer knows this is where to stop. So if we put a Kirishitanban text into any sort of text segmentation platform, it doesn't do very well, because these are all unknown terms, right? They're not in the dictionaries and word banks being used by text segmentation software. So we're creating then a dictionary, a searchable dictionary, and linked to that then a downloadable sort of bank of words that can then be put in by whoever wants to do that into the different segmentation platforms. I was hoping to launch today, but we're not ready. So early December, I think, because we have I want to steal that term, cost of input is quite high, I found. But I mean, we're trying to keep it simple, so it's just a search bar. And in addition to the search bar, you can just scroll through results based on the first kana, the first letter. Right? So you can click on A and look at all the results for A, or you can type in A. And we're giving the modern Japanese, the English, and if the word is of foreign origin, we also give the word in the original language. And this is hopefully going to be out in December, as I say. At launch, it's going to have about 500 words, but we have another 500 identified or so. So it's a long project, probably into the future. So that's about it. I hope you don't mind if I'm really candid. I know that most of these things are for a really small number of people. But I hope opportunities like today are going to foster some collaboration and take some of the data being built here into other projects, for example, and see how we can collaborate to solve sort of shared problems and how we can share our solutions as well. Moving forward into the next year, where we don't have funding, hopefully we'll get some, we're hoping to expand and release this dictionary, to begin to digitize a lot of texts that we've purchased as part of the project so far, which are not currently even available in digital format at all, and to also release an online bibliography. Wonderful, that's everything. Sorry I went a bit over. Thank you very much. Oh.